Getting into it, for those of you just joining us, we are talking all things Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, the things that we're excited for, the questions that we have, the hopes and fears. So, Teos, you were just alluding to the fact that Draconians, who are an element of Dragonlance lore, could potentially come or not come with the introduction of some of these elements of the world. And of course, our narrator, Fizban the Fabulous. So I want to talk a little bit about lore that we're getting with this book, because I find that very personally exciting. We talked a little bit about that we're going to hear about the First World, and he is listed as a hero of the War of the Lance, so we can definitely expect at least a little bit of flavor there. We know this is not primarily a campaign setting book, but along with that cosmology of the way dragons tie into the different planes, we are expecting to get a lot of delicious, flavorful multiversal goodness with this book. Is there something that you are most hoping for or excited for in the lore that comes with Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, Riley?
I think the thing we talked about earlier about the way that dragons interact with their selves across different planes, like that's really interesting to me as someone who's a fan of multiverses, and also the idea that they can eventually like merge with their forms, become more powerful. Like that's really interesting to me. So that I think that's the lore bit that I'm most excited about. So that's what jumped out at me is the idea of them merging, and also the thing I mentioned earlier about the way that they're like an essential part of the physical world as opposed to just like creatures that exist in the world.
And we know we're going to get
in that.
Yeah. Continue, please.
The just making it practical lore is always really important. Like I love all the book lore, but there's only so much you do with that. But this idea of how their reflections work, how it links to their hordes, what makes them great, that could be really fun for a DM to bring out and play, right? You want to have it tangible.
I'm really excited about this idea that the magic items that you find in Dragon's Hoard can be steeped in other Dragon's Hoard to be given special different abilities and be affected by it. I think that's a really fun thing you could drop into even like existing campaigns, like a Tyranny of Dragons campaign, as you're going around the world and interacting with different dragons and like going to different hordes. I think the idea that you could like change magic items that you have in your possession based on what's happening, it's a really fun detail for like a fetch quest.
Plus, it's like an epigenetic quality to sort of the items where you're just like, it has like, or like secondary mutations. I'm bringing it back to comics like I do on every stream. But, these evolutions that can change your play experience. And I would say maybe even like act either as inducement. You need to go get this thing and give it this effect in order to strengthen or weaken the dragon that you're after. Or it could even be a ticking clock. If you all can't get out of this lair in time, your magic item will be indelibly affected by it. Is that a good thing? That's up to you and your party and your DM. I love that you mentioned that because I think that's so cool and exciting. Teos?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say about the lore side that I am always curious about what the truth is. I'm that kind of person. And I know it's just things that people make up because sometimes I'm one of those people that makes it up. But I'm still curious if anybody knows. It's James Wyatt. He's been around forever. He's the kind of person that can rattle off Forgotten Realms history like nobody's business because he has a hand in it. And I'm curious to what extent we'll get a real answer on what the origin story was for dragons way back when, because even in Forgotten Realms lore, there's sort of two views of it as to whether they caused the first sundering, which is the separation of the two worlds of a bear and Taural. I won't get too geeky, but just I'm curious whether we'll get answers in that. And that part of my brain is always excited to see what's in the pages.
And we know that Bahamut and Tiamat were involved in the creation of the first world, and then a cataclysm caused it to be destroyed, and somehow that has resulted in all of our things, and the dragons are going to meet each other, Council of Reeds style, to go back to Fantastic Four, or potentially spoilery more recent references that we'll all just think but not say out loud in case people aren't caught up, with various nerd media. But I love this kind of storytelling. I love this kind of cosmology. And I am both excited and already sort of tantalized by the fact that some of the lore we're going to get about dragons is going to be explicitly designed, much like Van Richten's was, for a choose how this fits in your world version of reality. I loved hearing James Wyatt talk about dragon eggs at D&D Live last week, because he was sharing that there will be potentially tables or descriptions or these options for, if dragons, they're not just big lizards, they're magical creatures, so their eggs are not just ordinary eggs. But he listed multiple things that those eggs could be. Perhaps they're created by a council. Perhaps they are a naturally occurring resource. Perhaps, and it's all these different, in your game, in your world, how do dragon eggs work? And for someone who likes to have answers to everything, I have really enjoyed sort of being forced to come along into this. You're right. There are so many ways that can go, and we get to decide in our games which one is canon. More exciting or more scary? You're both very creative, so probably more exciting. I'm just taking a guess.
I think both. Yeah, I think it's like.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, here's a piece of lore I love. There's this possibility that the first dragon god sundered a giant crystal moon, which rained down upon the Forgotten Realms, creating the Sea of Falling Stars. And all of those shards were dragon eggs, and those were the first dragons, right? Or another one is that a primordial split the dragon god in half, creating Bahamut and Tiamat. And the two worked together to defeat that primordial and then became enemies, right? Like, just, and that their blood created the dragons. I mean, wonderful stuff. Love it.
I love, Riley, the way that connects to looking at other mythologies, like Mythic Odysseys of Theros, for flavors that you can bring into your fantasy world, because, of course, there's just a tremendous amount of potential inspiration. And the idea of, like, there's a million different origin stories you can look at to be inspired by when you're crafting your fictions. And I love that the game is increasingly, I feel, leaning in we're going to give you a bunch of rich stuff, but you get to choose your own spin on it. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, that's one of the things the Theros book does really well, is when you get to a section on gods in Theros, it'll actually list like 3 or 4 different myths about that god in the world, and sometimes they're conflicting. Like, wait, could this one be true if this one was true? And the answer is yes and no, because it's D&D and you can have fun with it however you want to have fun with it. And that's, I think, a really fascinating way to play it. And I think that that's how I like to approach it. Is I like when they give you things to work with, but they don't give you a thing where it's like, it has to be this way, and this is the lore, and this is what we're doing with it now. It's more like, no, here's some nuggets of ideas, and you're really fun and creative, and here's some ways you can go with it. So I like that. I'm a big fan of that kind of source book.
And along that angle of mythic creatures, I was just going to say that the idea of understanding how they're special, they're not just, some powerful boss that you put at the end of your dungeon, but they have something that's mythic, right? They truly are greater than most things. It's why they're in the name of the game, right? And the books have often done a great job of showing like their physiology as even being magical and important and non-standard, right? Like giving you like labeling parts and things like that. And I'm really excited for that, because it's the kind of thing that helps DMs think through how to create that whole scene to be really, truly something special when you meet that dragon.
And of course, those are going to come with actual usable maps for some of these layers, with a lot of descriptions of generating dragon personalities that you might want to use in your game. And of course, with tons and tons of stat blocks and monster descriptions for putting into effect. We do have time, I think, for a couple of questions. If folks want to shoot us some questions in chat, someone is collecting those and passing them on. And I believe Victorian Bride had asked, do we know if there are going to be chromatic dragonborns and kobolds? We can say that they have not talked about kobolds being reskinned or refeatured. That was part of the playtest material, but as we've learned, the playtest material isn't always one-to-one with what they're working on or sourcing. As like the person who's kind of disappointed that the Strixhaven subclasses did not meet with large scale love. I know that they are subject to change always, and so we don't have confirmation on that being part of Fizban's. But chromatic dragonborns, we should have some updates to dragonborn stuff in general with this book. So I would say, in addition to introducing the gem dragonborns, for sure, I would expect some good stuff for the other dragonborn types.
And I would say on the note of kobolds, like even if there's not an officially published update to the kobolds, you could easily probably adapt a lot of what they're bringing to Dragonborns into your kobold character. So a little bit of home brewing and rule of cool there. I think you could probably do a lot with it just using the resources that the book's going to give you. It'll give you inspirations and suggestions of things to work with.
Yeah, and you can also find old adventures that are full of ideas on how to create like epic level kobolds that serve godlike gods, which I think is always super neat. And a really simple thing is you go into D&D Beyond, you take some really cool, powerful monster, and you call it a kobold, and you make a few changes, and now you've got your custom monster, which is a awesome kobold lieutenant that has been empowered by the dragon it serves, right?
I do. I never get tired. It's a basic fact of the game, so I know it's maybe silly to just keep randomly pointing out things that just happen to be true about D&D, but I love the way official material, I care very deeply about what choices they do and don't make, but I also love the fact that, like, I love a lot of different mediums, but in comics, I don't get to decide that the thing on the page isn't what happened on the page, whereas when I'm playing a tabletop RPG, canon is what happens at my table. And it exists alongside, yes, certainly the official sources are the official sources, and they're full of inspiration and judgment calls that you may be like, oh, I would make gem dragons like this. But you actually can when you're playing the game in a way that, like, I lack the technical skill to do that with a video game. I can't just make things work the way I want them to work in a video game. But in D&D, when I'm DMing my table, my rules, I just don't get tired of it, y'all. I don't know. I love that about TTRPGs. Has nothing to do with this book. I just like it.
From what I read, this book will have some insights on how to build mechanics, and it sounds like maybe how to build encounters, and then maybe we'll have some tables that help you build the encounters to combine things, which is always, I think, a big challenge for DMs is how do you create sort of that neat boss fight, but then have these support enemies that heighten that action, and so I'm looking forward to seeing what that provides.
Not just, I love that ties into everything they're giving us for environments, like the kind of creatures you might find around the dragon, the kinds of things likely to support them, along with how to decide what treasure should be in their hoard and what says about them as a person. Riley,
as a dragon,
aside from me just ranting, as a dragon, you're right. Aside from me just ranting about loving TTRPGs, what else that we haven't talked about yet are you excited to get into with Fizban's Treasury of Dragons?
I feel like I hit my biggest point. We talked a little bit about the spells. I am excited. I haven't read the full chart of the new spells yet, but I like the idea of more dragon themed spells. Specifically, I mentioned earlier how much I really love the draconic bloodline sorcerers, which is it's one of the most classic 5e sorcerer. It's the sorcerer subclass that comes in the basic starter kit, and so I feel like the idea of having spells that are more dragon themed might be really fun for someone playing that. So I like the idea that this book can really breathe some new life into, I don't want to say old at this point, 5e is not that old of a version of the game, but it feels like it. But I think like taking a subclass that's existed since 5e was released and giving it this new element is really interesting to me. So I think that's what I'm most excited about with this book is what I said earlier about the facelift that it gives to the lore for people who really cut their teeth on D&D in 5e, while also still making things exciting for people who are more historical players of the game too. So
striking that balance. Teos, what else that we might not have covered yet among all the discussion and the juicy details we know so far about Fizban's Treasury of Dragons would you want to make sure we talk about?
Well, there's also supposed to be some guidance on campaigns, and that's also a neat idea that you're not just ending something or putting a dragon in a scene, but that it's really the feature of a campaign. And especially with how these dragons are supposed to be able to grow, that could be really great. There have been some really nice examples in D&D's past, but helping DMs to create their own version of that's awesome.
I love that because truly, I've been DMing just for a couple of years now. I've been playing forever, but my DM skills are still growing with me. And that gap of, I know how to put you up against a monster and I know how to plan an adventure I'm really going to enjoy today, but how do you do these like book length adventures? How do you get from here to there? That's a tough thing to sort of guide people along without making a bunch of really specialized materials that are only going to be accurate for the person who's 35% away along that journey. So I like the way I feel like, are sprinkling it into different books. Like, I feel like I learned a lot about that stuff from Ben Richton's Guide to Ravenloft, where they're sort of like, here's the way that your Dark Lord and their surrounding dangers might play into your choices for an adventure. It was like a little boot camp on adventure creation, hiding inside of the horror setting. So I do love that Riley.
Oh, I was gonna say I agree with that point, and I think the book that I first really noticed it with was the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, where whenever you would get a new region, here's like 3 plot hooks. Like if you are looking for something to like, if you're like just like a way of inspiring ideas, and then also on that idea of building book length adventures, we talked briefly earlier about the mythic monster encounters aspect of Theros, which they're bringing into this for the dragons as well. And what that is in a nutshell is a special thing you can add, almost like a lair action on level 20, like a higher level lair action that really kind of just like, it's like as a DM, it's your chance to just throw the gauntlet down and like, oh, you thought this was going to be easy, and then here's what happens. So it's almost always something that the monster can do with, like, it's like suddenly it's a whole new ball game. It's like Sephiroth casting me, like it's like suddenly things are just going off, and you're like, oh, I thought this was just going to be a combat. This is a campaign ending, massive thing that's happening, and so it kicks up your CR levels to a higher level, and it also just builds this awesome, fun, dramatic moment. So like we've had example, like in Theros, for example, there's a Gorgon that after you defeat her, she just like sheds her skin and comes back newer and fresher and ready for the fight. And I love the idea of finding out what kind of mythical encounters they're going to add in for dragons. Like, what are the things where the dragon's like, oh, you thought this was your day? Oh, it's my day. And I love finding out. I can't wait to see what they do with that.
You know, I'm thinking that could also fit into this whole idea of echoes, because, you know, what if the whole mythic concept is your dragon sort of dies but comes back as another of its echoes, and that's how it, you know, achieves its mythic form.
Ooh.
I mean, I think that's just beautiful, right?
Or now all those echoes have declared vengeance on you, and that's now a new campaign of you trying to survive while all these dragons from other realms are now like has a target on your back.
Or you made friends with one, but another one is less happy with you. What?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that one of the things I love about the guidance on dragons that's existed in the past in some of these old neat books is that it's the idea that the dragons, and this is really strong in 5th edition, they exude an aura, a presence that corrupts the terrain around them, right? Yes. And so the forest changes, the swamp changes, the mountain changes, it becomes more perilous of a terrain. But it has these features, and what that does is it gives a great theme that your players are enjoying as they're moving up in levels or going through this sort of experience. And we had fun with the first ever Adventurers League epic that I had a strong hand in helping with. We did that to create this sense of dread in the forest around this ancient dragon called Claugiliamatar, because that's a great name. And what presence she exuded upon the forest to, you know, cover it in spider webs and bring in fell creatures and just have that feeling of taint that you must end. It was great.
That sounds awesome.
Incredible. Thank you both so much for joining me. This has been an absolute blast. For folks who might want to get more of your fabulous insights, would you please tell us where people can find you, and maybe if you have anything exciting going on? Teos?
Sure. Find me at alphastream.org. You can join my mailing list. You'll get a free guide to campaign creation. You can do collaboratively with your players. You can find me at AlphaStream on Twitter. And the recent cool thing was that I wrote the adventure for Matt Colville's new book that just released this week. That is Kingdoms and Warfare. It was a super awesome project. It was great. And so I hope everybody really enjoys that. Oh, I'm also on the Dune stream. We're playing the Dune RPG. And you can find me on Mastering Dungeons podcast.
So check out Dune's on Saving Throw show, right? On Tuesdays? With just killer cast, great system. They're teaching as they play. Yeah. Riley, where can people find you?
Oh, you can find me on Twitter at Riley J. Silverman or Instagram at Riley Silverman. And something cool that I have going on right now is that I am one of the contributing writers to Karen Hallian's new book, the She series book. It is a book that is highlighting a bunch of amazing women throughout history and in the modern day who have had a lot of impact on people. Karen has this series of portraits she's done of all these women, and now she has a book coming out where she has brought in a bunch of writers to write about what they mean to us. And I am one of those writers alongside some really great folks like Amy Ratcliffe or Jodie Hauser or, I don't know, Kate Mulgrew, aka Captain Janeway from Star Trek, who's going to be in a book that I'm in, which is mind-blowing. So
You're
that
basically
is available
coworkers.
on. Yeah, exactly. She's my captain. So there's coffee in that break room. So I guess that's where you would normally find coffee. Anyway, you can find out about. There's a Kickstarter right now for it. It's on Kickstarter as She Series Book by Karen Hallian. We blew through our initial goal on the very first day for it, but now we're trying to hit some stretch goals that will allow other writers to contribute their essays to the book as well. So basically, once she hits certain goals, she'll add 10 more portraits and essays to it, or possibly expand it into another set of books. Who knows? But it's also a great way for you to get a copy of the book at a lower price. So yeah, go to Kickstarter and check out She Series Book. I wrote about Marsha P. Johnson and Lucille Ball. So very, very different women, but also both very influential in my life for various reasons. And so I recommend that. And I'm really excited to see what everybody else wrote about their women. And yeah, so again, the Karen Hallian She Series book on Kickstarter.
Ah, that's fabulous, powerful, hilarious, in charge. I can see the influence. That's incredible. Thank you both so much for joining me. You can pre-order Fizban's Treasury of Dragons right now on dndbeyond.com. There's probably a link running through chat, or if you're watching this on YouTube, it's in the description. I am very excited to keep getting to share more, to keep just throwing up the turtle art for no reason. I mean, I'm just saying, it's the best. And I hope everyone will really dig this when it comes our way. And we will see you next time on D&D Beyond. Thanks so much.
It's D&D.